our special discussion this half hour. Well, it wasn't too long ago when Russia was accused of meddling in the U.S. presidential race last year. And now a Russian hacker group is accused of carrying out cyber attacks on none other than Chancellor Angela Merkel from Germany. Here's a report.
A top leader of German Chancellor Angela Merkel's Conservative Party has claimed that her website was hit by thousands of cyber attacks ahead of her televised election debate on 3rd of September. She claimed that many of those attacks had Russian IP addresses. This claim also reflects concerns voiced by German intelligence and government officials that Moscow could seek to interfere in the September 24th national election. Russia has dismissed the concerns, saying it has no intentions of influencing the elections. German authorities on various occasions have blamed Russian hacker group APT28 for cyber attacks on the German parliament, individual lawmakers, political parties and political think tanks since 2015. There is no clear information on how these attacks were discovered, but it is said that many such attacks involved phishing that includes attachments with malicious software. According to Hans-Georg Maaßen, the head of Germany's BFV domestic intelligence agency, Berlin expects Russia to influence the upcoming polls as it would prefer that Merkel be defeated. Curiously, it's not clear what damage these cyber attacks have caused, nor is it clear how, through cyber attacks, Russia can hope to influence the conduct and mind of voters. Bureau Report, WION.
Well, joining us now on the discussion for the German elections hacking story, we have journalist from Die Welt, Jan Lindenau, joining us from Berlin. We also have Tyson Barker, the director of the Aspen Institute for Deutschland, joining us from Germany. And we have WION's London bureau chief, Mandy Clark, joining us from London. Good evening to all three of you. We'll get to our discussion shortly. But first, let me start with Jan Lindenau joining us from Berlin. Jan, you know, this concern is not something new. It's something that we've seen before when it came to the French elections and last year's U.S. elections about Russia's involvement or alleged involvement. And now it looks like it's Germany's turn. How is this being reported in the German media? Jan.
Thanks for having me first. In German media, the German media is more or less a little bit relaxed because we heard those stories for the last 2 years. It started all in January 2015 with the hacks on our parliament. Then there was this big case, Lisa, in January 2016. So everybody knew, okay, there's something, there may something be coming, but nothing ever happened. So people started to think, okay, what's going to happen? And occasionally nothing happened. So we didn't see any major leaks, nothing that really influenced the elections or the campaigns until now. So people are still waiting if there's anything coming, but they are more or less relaxed.
Oh, what an interesting perspective there. Let me also bring in Mandy Clark joining us from London. Mandy, you were there on the ground covering the New York elections for the Trump versus Clinton face-off last year. And even now, U.S. President Donald Trump sort of facing those accusations of alleged Russian involvement. So let me ask you the broader question. Why is Russia always involved or allegedly involved when it comes to these elections? I mean, what is their motive if they are truly playing a role in influencing the outcomes?
Well, it's impossible to get in the mindset, but I think it's certainly power and control. To have the ability to influence an election would be an incredibly powerful tool. As you point out, they've always denied being behind those attacks, although the U.S. has presented strong evidence that these hackers have originated from Russia. An interesting point that came out of the an article that the former Estonian president suggested was that Germany should possibly go on the defensive and invoke its NATO allies. Being part of the NATO alliance, an attack on one is an attack on all if they invoke Article 4. And he argues that whether it's an attack of physical territory or a cyber attack, it would certainly send a message, a very strong message to Russia that they do not tolerate or accept cyber attacks. Now, that's a pretty extreme reaction, but it's being put out there as something that Germany should consider.
All right, Mandy, let me also ask you a follow-up question to that when it comes to, the involvement. I mean, how does this perhaps change? I mean, the elections haven't happened just yet. In fact, just recently there was a debate between Merkel and Schulz, her opponent, and reports right now look like Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel will more than likely take the lead. But again, drawing parallels to Trump and Clinton, it did come as a bit of a surprise. I mean, what exactly is the strategy, if any? I mean, do the candidates have to perhaps take this into consideration, take this into account that Russia is also a factor in addition to other issues that are on the table?
Well, I think the politicians obviously consider security threats, whether it's coming from Russia or elsewhere, all play a part in elections, and it can certainly influence elections. Separately to the Russian hacking, the elections that happened in the UK, it was very much focused on Brexit. But there were two terror attacks that happened in between when the election was called and the results, and that certainly colored the conversation and the focus of the election. So it's not just the hacking attacks. Other events can really influence what's going to happen, and that is certainly the politicians will be looking at all security angles, not just those hacking attacks as well. But certainly they don't want Russia to have a voice in their election. This is an election for the German people, and it shouldn't happen outside its borders.
All right, interesting perspective there indeed. We'll continue the conversation with both Jan and Mandy and Tyson in just a bit. But let's also get you some background in terms of where and when Russia was in fact allegedly accused of intervening in elections. Well, last year, Russia was accused of hacking U.S. presidential elections. And of course, this is still an ongoing debate between Donald Trump as well as his campaign team, as well as the Republicans there in the White House. In 2017, the U.S. claimed that Russia hacked the French elections as well during the time when Emmanuel Macron ended up winning. Merkel's ally alleges that there was a massive cyber attack from a Russian IP address right around the time of the debate. In fact, 3,000 different situations. So what are the ties between Germany and Russia? The economic ties. Well, Russia is Germany's 11th biggest export market. Germany is Russia's 7th biggest buyer of goods and services. Germany also gets about a third of its oil and gas from Russia, and one third of the European Union's exports to Russia come directly from Germany. 10% of German exporters trade with Russia as well. Well, the battle for power in Germany, certainly an interesting one. The elections will take place in about 3 weeks on September the 24th. A direct fight between Merkel's Christian Democratic Union and Martin Schulz's Social Democratic Party. Chancellor Angela Merkel is hoping to win a fourth term. The national security and immigration policy will dominate the agenda for this year's elections. Merkel faced severe heat last year after she welcomed nearly 900,000 refugees into the country. So lots of issues, lots of things on the debate. Let me go back to Jan joining us from Berlin. Let's go back to some of the specifics when it comes to the focus on the elections. September the 24th, Jan, what are the issues that are most on voters' minds? Certainly Angela Merkel taking a lot of heat for the refugee policy. What is on the voters' minds?
TV duel on last Sunday. Half of the time, both Martin Schulz and Angela Merkel, they discussed issues about refugees, about Islam, about terrorism, about security, about securing the borders of Germany. So this is more or less the major topic. Of course, there are some voices who are saying, okay, we have more important issues in our country, social security, education. But I think if you look really at the most concerning topics, it's migration.
You mentioned immigration there, Jan. Is there perhaps a different stance when it comes to the two different parties between Schulz and Merkel in terms of how they would perhaps handle the refugees? I mean, there was certainly that attack in Nice last year. There was the attack in Berlin and many other European cities that dealt with terror in one way, shape or form. Paris, Brussels, London, Stockholm, Barcelona recently. So certainly the element of security and the protection against terrorism is going to be on voters' minds. How did the candidates, in your opinion, sort of address that issue, and did one perhaps have a better strategy than the other?
I don't know if it's a better strategy, but there is one party who has a different approach. That's the Alternative for Germany, right-wing populist party, and they are addressing the immigration terrorism as a huge concern, as a huge issue, and they are saying we should close the border. And here we are coming back to the Russian influence, or probably influences in Germany, because in Germany we have a really unique situation in Europe, because we have a big group, a big minority of the so-called Russian Germans, people who came from the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, from Russia in the 90s. And they are more likely to vote for the Alternative for Germany. And I think that is like one of the major points that could shift the elections into that way, but you can't say for sure.
All right, let me bring Mandy in really quickly as well. Mandy, you know, of course, you've covered your share of attacks, unfortunately, if we'd like to say, but London taking the brunt of it. Manchester, of course, you were there on the ground, and several attacks in Europe over the last few months since 2015 when that attack happened in Paris. How important do you think that is going to influence voters in your mind? I mean, UK just went through this with the whole Brexit referendum with Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn, and now Germany's turn. Certainly security, a hot-button topic when it comes to the candidates.
Yeah, I think, you know, because there has been repeated and widespread attacks across Europe, even though it hasn't happened in, you know, the last few weeks, it certainly will play on the voters' minds. There was that, of course, that Christmas market attack that happened in Germany. So it's a very real threat they face as well, and it will be part of that wider narrative. Now, it's who will own that narrative. People are arguing that these attacks are from refugees, from the immigrant population that are coming in and are attacking the German and European way of life. But it's been seen, at least in the past attacks in the UK predominantly, but also in Europe, that a lot of the attackers were British born, or they were already naturalized citizens of Europe. So that argument doesn't necessarily is founded in fact, but it does have a way to influence the population, because security is primary for the population to succeed and grow.
Absolutely. It's certainly going to be interesting over the next 3 weeks and how the candidates pertain and present that issue. Let me also now bring in Tyson Barker, the program director for the Aspen Institute there in Deutschland. Tyson, great to have you on the program. Your first reaction to the alleged cyber attacks on Merkel's ally before the 24th of September.
So this hack that happened over the weekend in Rheinland-Pfalz is not a new occurrence. There have been hacks attributed to Russian intelligence over the course of the past 2.5 years, starting with the most famous incident in the Bundestag, the German parliament, national parliament, in 2015. But there have been additional hacks in her party's youth auxiliary, in her party headquarters in the Saarland, a very small state in the west, in the Linke, the successor party to the communists, and several SPD members as well. So this is consistent with a pattern that has been taking place over the course of 2.5 years. The difference is that it has kind of pattered off a little bit. There hasn't been as much activity as we enter into the hot phase of this election.
All right, Tyson, let me also ask you, what is the clinching proof that this was allegedly done by the Russians? I mean, there were speculation that there were about 3,000 cyber attacks on Merkel's website, and they pointed to IP addresses in Russia. But, I mean, is there any other concrete evidence or proof? Tyson?
The main forensics for this case is the fact that there are preponderant Russian IP addresses. Now, you can reroute IP addresses. You can basically cover your footprints, your digital footprints. But the fact that these are preponderantly Russian IP addresses traced to the source indicates that it is of Russian origin. Now, one could question whether or not this is Russian intelligence. And again, Russian intelligence is extremely adept at creating plausible deniability. But all the indications are there from all sorts of signatures that this is, in fact, Russian intelligence.
All right, let me bring in Jan back into the conversation. Jan, you know, why exactly is Russia always, by default, accused when it comes to these alleged involvements, whether it's France, U.S., or now Germany?
I think it's mostly because Russia has really they have an interest in weakening the EU and the US, of course, and that's the main reason. I think if you look, for example, at the alternative for Germany, is in the political system of Germany, it's like a new party who evolved, who's never been to the Bundestag, to the parliament, and they have a chance to really weaken the system as we know it. And the same is with the leaks for Macron. I think it would be easier for Putin to rule together with a President Le Pen and not with a President Macron. So I think it's about weakening the EU.
All right, Tyson, let me also ask you a very similar question when it comes to that. Moscow consistently denies these allegations against it, but is it a coincidence or is there more to it than meets the eye when it comes to Russia allegedly being accused of interfering in other countries' elections?
Vladimir Putin and his UN General Assembly speech in 2015 essentially equated openness with weakness, basically saying that open societies are more vulnerable than closed societies in which the state basically infuses all aspects of public life. So, there is almost like an ideological driver behind this, which is the sense that you can take advantage of these security vulnerabilities that are present in democratic societies with free and fair media, with freedom of speech, with raucous freedom of assembly, broad party system, party spectrum. And that's exactly what we're seeing here.
All right, and really quickly as we wrap this up, Tyson, France was certainly quite successful in thwarting the attacks. Now, does Germany have a similar plan? We know the United States is still sort of going back and forth on whether or not there was involvement, but what is Germany's plan, if any, as we're now just weeks away until September the 24th? Tyson.
I would attribute what happened in France more to the lack of sophistication of Russian intelligence than necessarily to the skill of the French defense. But I will say this, if you have a society, the ultimate resilience is going to come from society itself. If there is trust and faith in society's democratic institutions, that means the media, political parties, governments, military, police, judicial system, then they're going to have more resilience, stronger antibodies to combat any kind of fake news, hack and leak, any kind of active measures pushed by the Russians or anyone else. That is not the case in the United States right now. As we all know, faith in institutions is relatively low. There is a great polarization in U.S. society right now, and that is fertile ground for outside interference. Germany is in a much better position to manage this situation. So the German government is taking several steps. So one, they have much more, they finance parties. So they have a lot more control over creating regulations for party servers than the United States, where parties are private. Two, the voting system in Germany is rather different. The Constitution requires that all ballots be hand-voted, hand-cast. So any attempt to manipulate ballots at the point of voting would not be successful in Germany because it's not online. That is not the case in the United States. Now, we did not see that affected the outcome of the 2016 election in the United States, but that is one more point of strength for the German system. And three, I don't think you can discount the fact that the parties themselves have made an agreement not to use any hack and leak data for their own cheap political gain. That was not the case in the United States, as we saw from Donald Trump basically inviting the Russians to hack Hillary Clinton's servers.
All right, at this point, I'd like to thank all of our guests, Jan Lindenau, Tyson Barker, and Mandy Clark, for getting us perspective on Germany's elections and alleged Russian involvement. Thank you for your time.